Welcome to the Podcast Superfriends. 5 podcast producers from across North America get together to discuss podcasting.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, all the ships at sea, lovers, muggers, and thieves, welcome to the Podcast Superfriends. It's the podcast where we have 5 podcast kings and queen from across North America giving you advice on how to make your podcast the very best it can be. So today we're going to talk about segments, how to improve and pump up and punch up various podcast segments. It sounds a little vague, but it'll make sense in a moment. Let me go around the horn here and introduce our crew. From Texas, Johnny, would you please say hello?
Howdy, I'm Johnny Podcast coming from Fort Worth, Texas.
Thanks for checking in, Johnny. It's good to see you. Catherine from New Orleans. Tell us what's going on in Louisiana.
Checking in from a very rainy, slightly flooding South Louisiana, Baton Rouge. I'm Catherine O'Brien.
Flooding's rarely a problem in that area of the country, is it? Oh, sorry. Too soon, probably.
Ooh.
And from north of the border, Matt, would you please say hello to the gang?
Matt Kundle, the Soundoff Media Company, self-professed podcast wizard from Winnipeg, Canada.
And the badass podcaster from the 313, although originally from the 617. Jag, say hello, please.
Thank you. I'm like ludicrous, different area codes. John Gay, Jag In Detroit Podcasts.
Oh, boy. Happily
Very
married.
good. So we hope if this is your first time tuning in, we have a little fun here. But we try to give real concrete examples of what to do and what not to do in podcast. And we thought we'd actually play certain selected segments from podcasts. Some of them may be prominent national podcasts. Some of them may be attached to the very podcast producers that you see here on our podcast today. So let's just jump right into it. And we're going to start with Johnny Podcast. And I know you've selected a podcast that I've certainly heard of before.
I do not produce this show.
Correct.
A man can dream.
So let's see. And Matt, I'm trying to, after testing, oh, yeah, we go. Okay, we got the slide on the screen for the video viewers, the live stream viewers. Yeah, Johnny, tell us, before I play the clip, tell them a little bit about, either what you don't like or don't like about this and what we're going to hear.
This is my absolute number one podcast. I love this show. So this is the Ryan Russillo Show. This is a Spotify podcast. Spotify bought The Ringer during that whole boom of podcasting. So the Ringer is just a sports podcast network. They do culture and stuff, but this show in particular, Ryan is a former ESPN radio host, moved into podcasting, is just an amazing host, and he does sort of a 3-segment type show. So it starts with his sort of cold open. He'll do a few selected topics that he'll kind of just riff on. Then it will we'll transition into an interview, usually with somebody in the media space. And on this particular episode, it was a former NBA player. And then the segment that I wanted to highlight is at the end, which I have just found to be his most popular segment and has brought in a total non-sports demographic, is his life advice segment. So they end it with him and his 2 producers reading emails, giving life advice. Has nothing to do with sports, but one of my favorite parts about it is the way that the listeners, it sort of is just community building segment, and the way that the listeners will write in their life advice questions is they give sort of a background on themselves. So if it were me going, I would say, "Hey Ryan, how's it going? Name's Johnny from Fort Worth, Texas, 6'3", 200 pounds. NBA comp would be a poor man's Duncan Robinson. Gym stats, above, below average. So not putting up a ton of weight in the gym, but we're working out consistently. Here's my problem. Something's going on with my girlfriend, blah, 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 blah." And they'll read the whole email and do a lot of back and forth. And it's just it's a really fun segment. And it's gotten a lot of the core listeners, male audiences, significant others interested in the podcast. So it's a really good way to sort of expand the audience and sort of take a break from the sports talk. So oftentimes I won't even listen to the first half of the podcast. I'll just jump right to this segment, listen to that for 30 minutes, and then I'm on with my day.
Life advice. The email address is lifeadvicerr@gmail.com. Okay, let's get to it. Our guy is beating up on himself, hugely in debt, no job. Girlfriend makes decent money and is financially stable. Some guys are like, what's the problem, right?
Living the dream, dude. What's your 2K rank, bro?
Next email.
What's your KDR in Call of Duty?
All right. Long time, first time, 27 basketball comp is Bob Cousy in today's game. I don't know that Cousy would dominate. I don't like when people diss the Coos, but I think he might struggle a bit. Very fluid movement, a lot of trick passes. Yes, I know how infuriating those can be as a teammate. Look, are you good at the trick passes, or you just try to throw trick passes in pickup games? Because that would suck.
Yeah.
Very streaky shooter. Means you can't shoot. All right, you know what? Let's not beat up on our guy here anymore. Watch a lot of Celtics film from 2005. So Rondo is my favorite player and the reason for the Cousy comp. Okay, understood. The situation is this. In 2019, I went to Vermont Law School at 21 years old to double major in an actual law degree and a master's in environmental law and policy. COVID hit, school went remote. Needless to say, I found the double major to be fairly tough and started to slip academically. I was able to skate by enough to get the master's degree, but I dropped the JD degree. All in for debt, I have $150K. I've never been able to get a real job in my field. I've done unpaid work for the Connecticut State agencies through a fellowship-type program while at Vermont Law School, so I'm not totally unqualified. And I graduated in January 22. So I'm a mess. Just stopped working at a group home-like place. Do you understand what that means?
Like group home, like halfway house type deal? Like fresh out, you got like 6 months of good behavior type thing?
Yeah.
Boy, you made it specific. I don't know.
I can cut to the chase of the advice that they basically give.
Okay.
So basically, they this guy's telling his girlfriend like, hey, he's beating up on himself in front of her, and they basically were telling her like, they're telling him this is a great way to get her to break up with you, and if that's what you want, then keep telling her that, but you need to stop being so hard on yourself, and definitely don't give her reasons to leave you if you want to spend the rest of your life with her, because that's what you're doing right now. So best thing is to, you can open up. They're saying you can break down to her once, say like, look, I'm struggling right now and this is really hard for me, but you need to spend more effort on getting your life together rather than sitting around feeling sad for yourself.
Yeah, I got the feeling there was a little woe is me in the tail. I mean, $150K is a lot of debt, but it's also not uncommon, I don't think, for someone that young. And it's not like he blew it on gambling. He got some
blew it on a worthless
that.
degree.
He got the bad end of the COVID school stick, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So to me, this is the value of this segment. Maybe first and foremost is it's great in listener engagement. I mean, talk about giving somebody an ownership stake. And is this what you're going to say, Johnny?
No, this is me still full screen.
You wanted to get off the full screen.
Get it off me.
I mean, that's to me, I go back and forth with this. When you produce a podcast that's quality, and let's say it's an interview style, and you got a great conversation, great storytelling, sometimes when you're exhausted and you don't have time to put in like a little nugget for listener engagement. But this to me seems like a great one. It really, whoever the guy is who wrote in, now he's got ownership in it, and he'll tell all his friends that he was mentioned on the show, or maybe he won't, depending upon it. But it really gives somebody an ownership. What do other folks think about this segment?
It's gotten to the point where they. Sorry. I thought you meant that their audience.
I just think that I think it's amazing how like sports is supposed to be some sort of male place where we go to listen to get away from all this stuff, but we can't wait to listen to other people's problems and hear some real life stuff. And there are some Ryan Russillo is clearly one. I don't spend nearly enough time listening. Colin Cowherd will do that on his show too. Just dive into some real life moments and some real life scenarios in order to paint it back to sports. But I think it's a podcast I'm going to start listening to. So thanks for turning me on to it.
I was going to say that yeah, I sure do. The thing that really stood out to me, it was legit good advice. I listened and I was thinking I'm just going to listen to a couple minutes just to satisfy for the show. I ended up listening through the entire advice segment to the end of the show, and I was like, this is actually very good advice. And one of the things that you drew our attention to, Johnny, is that it's not just Ryan, it's with a couple of producers in there as well. So it's three perspectives, and they were all legitimate. I also, in the sort of this, all these men talking, one thing I did notice is that there's a little bit of chiding, but I could tell that there was caring too. It was not mocking in any way. I get the sense that they all really do care about the people who are writing in, but there's just enough chiding to where it's not, too serious here.
You also mentioned how you ended up sticking around for the whole segment. That's the mark of a good segment, and that's right. Someone once called it the cooking segment phenomenon. There's a reason why there's so many late night talk shows and many talk shows that will feature a cooking segment, because when you see the thing being made, you tend to want to stick around to see what it looks like when it comes out of the oven. And so that's kind of a version of this. You heard this guy's tale of woe. You want to hear what the advice is. Jag, you got something on this?
Yeah, a quick shout out, by the way, to Ryan Russillo, graduate of the University of Vermont, go Cats go, and Massachusetts native. Very, very talented guy. He got his start working with Scott Van Pelt on ESPN Radio, so that tells you, his pedigree. Relationship stuff is gold, and radio folks will tell you that, and podcasters will tell you that. The typical, I'm going to stereotype here, but the typical sports fan is probably not going to sit down and watch The Bachelor, typical male sports fan. But it is interesting. And when you put it in this package, that it's a sports talk show, but you work in a little bit of real life relationship type stuff, it's a home run. And to the point earlier, I think Johnny said that it's brought some significant others. It's brought some more folks who may not be hardcore sports fans into the show. I think it's a brilliant segment and well executed.
Anything else?
It's not all serious stuff like that. It's not all like, all right, what's some crazy problems that this guy's have? Like the 150K in debt, like that's I've been listening to the show for years. That's a pretty heavy question that they've gotten in. If we had chosen another question within that same segment, it was a guy emailing in saying like, is it wrong for me to go see Dune 2 by myself without my male friend and not telling him, and then seeing it with him? Would he be butthurt about that? And they were just like, I don't know, man. It depends on your relationship with the guy. Like if it was your girlfriend or your wife or your significant other, maybe, but if it's just your bro, I don't know.
Yeah, there was a comedian named, I think her name was Allison Rosen, that I listened to her podcast for a short while, and she had a segment called "Is It Just Me or
Everyone?"
Yeah,
just me or everyone. Yeah,
just me or everyone, right? And it would be like, is it just me, or am I the only one who pulls my grocery cart over to the side in the grocery store to absolutely make sure there's enough room to get through, or does nobody else pay attention to this except me? And that's just one example, but I always would listen to that segment because it was always something that you would be like, oh yeah, that's kind of me too. So, so excellent example. Anything else on that, guys?
One last thing. So, everybody knows I'm not the biggest sports fan in the world. And so right at the beginning, everybody who writes in gives some stats, right? And they don't announce the stats, they just reel them off. And I thought, well, isn't this a great example of like a little bit of an insider? You have to be a little bit of a regular listener to know what's going on with those stats. But I picked it up really, right away. I was like, oh, this is like you're inside the club if you have to give these stats. So that was like a little bonding that I thought was built into the whole segment that makes it even more like cloistered, like you're in the club here.
Yeah. And I think that inside stuff is good to an extent, as long as it doesn't last forever and you're just lost, feel like you wandered into a conversation that
just enough.
Yeah, exactly. So Matt, I'm trying to put up the sound bites slide here. Am I doing something wrong?
Well, you've got this one right here.
Good one, Johnny, by the way.
Jag, you brought this one up. Why don't you give us a little preface? Yeah.
So Melissa Joy Dobbins, one of my dear clients, she is a certified nutrition diabetes specialist. I'm going to butcher her title and she's going to be mad at me, but I apologize. She's very big in the nutrition space and dietitian. She did a series on what they call flexitarian eating. So not vegetarian, not vegan, not carnivore, and not omnivore. There's a difference between flexitarian and omnivore. So she doesn't have specific segments in her show. So I just grabbed a clip from a recent show that I thought was some really good interaction between her and the guests.
Here it is.
Can we talk a little bit more about flexitarian in the sense of, what's the difference between a flexitarian and just an omnivore?
Oh my gosh, I gotta tell you, I wrote the book. I did the series of interviews all over. I mean, all national outlets, everywhere. I'm doing interviews. The very first question, and I think I'm ready, by the way. I prepped myself.
And you do know how to prep.
And I know how to prep. And the very first question I got talking about the flexitarian diet was the question of, how is this different than an omnivore? Who, I was like, oh my gosh, what a great question. And I'm totally unprepared to answer this. So these days, I figured out an answer, on the spot. And it really is the intention of a flexitarian is to wake up in the morning and eat more plant-based, right? That's the intention. And an omnivore wakes up and eats everything. So it really is, the intention of a flexitarian is to be more plant-based. And so that's the answer there. But I got to tell you, that one, when I first heard it, I was shocked.
You're like, deer in the headlights.
It's a good question, though. And I like it because it goes back to what we say is that aren't you just suggesting a whole bunch of healthy foods? And it's like, yep, absolutely true. But the intention is, can you eat more plants that, as a flexitarian?
In making that shift.
Yeah.
Within what works for you.
Yep, exactly.
There's your clip. Who would like to lead off on this one? Matt, would you like to chime in first?
I want to know why how this sort of is what is the segment here?
It's not a specific segment because I missed the last meeting. I own the fact that I whiffed on the assignment a little bit, so I'm the slacker this week. But I thought we were going to do full shows like we had the previous time, and then I found out late that it was just segments. So I pulled that as what I thought was the best clip of the show. And
it is because for me, this is something that I've been thinking about. Like, can we come up with something that is going to be okay? I want to eat more plant-based, but how do I work it in? And so I'm getting the confirmation here, but I thought that was really well explained. And I think sort of isolating first thing in the morning was really the way that it came across. And yeah, I'm a buyer of what is being said here, and especially the way that it was explained, and such a cheery voice, which really does make all the difference.
Yeah, I was going to say it may not be a segment, but it could be, Jag. I mean, that to me was like question of the day. Would be mysterious to maybe, well, to me certainly. I learned something. I don't know if the vast majority of the listeners to this podcast did, but anyway,
flexitarian. The flexitarian tips, suggestions.
Yeah.
Well, I thought this was so relatable because the quandary that we all get in is that you know your own topic so well, and then you get put on the spot and you might kind of blank. So you're here saying, "Hey, I'm here to talk about a flexitarian eating style," and then the first question is, "Okay, well, how's flexitarian different from omnivore?" And it's like, okay, we've all been in that kind of, I wish I had a little bit more polish, and they handled it so well. So I related to everybody who was talking. I've been in those kinds of situations, and they all handled it with a certain amount of grace that made it fun and lively, while also, most important, defining what a flexitarian is. The only comment I have that I think would, to just add to that, is that I think it would be great if the host had sort of done like a recap, like, here's your chance for a do-over, because giving the audience a little bit of a recap to say, not just the story of almost flubbing the definition of a flexitarian, but now here's the real definition that you can walk away with as the listener.
Yeah, like the takeaway.
Yeah, exactly. A little quick recap, but the relatability is solid.
Jag, is this an interview-based podcast?
Yes.
Okay, so that was kind of my assumption. And what I loved about that particular clip from the podcast is it didn't feel like an interview. She really made it feel like it was just three professionals having a conversation, but also relating it all, like Catherine said, relating it in a way that every person who's not a dietitian, but someone who's just interested in being healthier can relate to that. Because as soon as I had the same thought as everybody else when she said flexitarian, I thought, isn't that just a normal diet?
Yeah.
Like that's just normal eating throughout the day. But she did a really good job of explaining it. And now someone who wants to maybe not commit to something as harsh as like a vegan diet or like a carnivore diet can go into it, like she said, with the intention of, now I'm committing to a diet, but it's not going to take over my entire life. And it got away from the whole question, answer, which a lot of podcasts fall into the habit of being, but it became more of three people at a round table having a conversation, where you feel like you're a fly on the wall, which is the essence of what a podcast is supposed to be.
To that end, and I'll give Melissa a compliment here. This was actually a sponsored episode. The content was sponsored, and you wouldn't know it by the flow of the interview. And granted, she has relationships with the two guests that she had on the show, and she knows them pretty well. But I thought she did a great job in the interview of, to your point, making it a friendly conversation and not script question, script answer, etc.
And it was edited flawlessly, I could tell, and the sound quality was superb, Jag.
Thank you.
Not lost on me here is the show is called Sound Bites, and we're talking about segments which a lot of people will refer to as bites.
Right. Wow. And that was Melissa has some media background, and that was done on purpose. She's had the show. She had the show longer than she's had me, but it's a great name for the show.
Yeah.
All right, we're up to Catherine's submission. And Matt, if you could help me get the blocked and reported slide up there, because there we go. Catherine, you want to give us a little intro to this?
Sure. Blocked and Reported is a podcast hosted by two, what I would call them lib journalists who have each gone through their own cancellation. And they launched this podcast very successfully through the pandemic. They've been going since 2020. And their whole show is analyzing internet baloney. And the reason I brought this particular segment to light and to what we're talking about today is that they have a either famous or infamous, depending on who you talk to, housekeeping section. Now, we've all talked about, as podcast producers, we want to get our call to action out. We want to get our info out. Here's our website. Here's how you can do this. Here's how you can support the show. But you want to do it in a way that is not dry, that people don't want to skip over, that you want to make it feel like part of the show. And this is why I've brought this segment. The housekeeping on Blocked and Reported is a segment unto itself.
And here's the clip.
Katie, I've been talking a lot. Try to do housekeeping.
Try? You don't think I can do it?
No, I don't.
We've been doing this show for 3.5 years, and you don't think I can do some fucking housekeeping?
What's our URL without looking it up?
This is a podcast. I don't fuck me up with the script.
That's not our.
We are a
URL.
podcast. You can reach out to us at blockedandreportedpodcast@gmail.com. You can also check us out on our subreddit at blockedandreported.reddit.com.
Yeah, I mean you're performing surprisingly well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You can buy merch. We have hoodies. We have hats. We have tote bags.
Squirrel skin.
That is at
caps.
We have squirrel suits. Yes, that is at Blocked and Reported merch. Wait, fuck that one up. That is at barpodmerch.com. Just there's a link on our Substack.
You were at like a B+. Now you're at a C, just because of those last three
That's
sections.
Fine. Okay, so the main thing, the important thing to remember here, it's not the merch, it's not the subreddits, it's not emailing us your complaints. It's that if you go to blockedandreported.org.
This has to be shtick at this point.
It's not, Jesse. I have a brain tumor.
Wait, what?
I have many little brain tumors. Yes, they're very specific.
You can't call weed smoke brain tumors.
I told you I quit smoking weed. I just eat it now.
Blockedandreported.org. You can become a primo and get 3 extra episodes a month.
So I love that you brought this up, Catherine. But I have to ask you, and maybe I'm sort of asking an obvious question, is the fact that the housekeeping is a phenomenon because the female host always screws it up and you just don't know which way she's going to screw it up? Or
Yes, that is part of it. As Jesse, the other Katie and Jesse, as Jesse said, it must be shtick at this point, but it
right.
truly is not. This is truly how she is operating. And amongst the fans of the show, which are many, "We are a podcast" line in the housekeeping has become like lore. Like they have to always state we are a podcast. Even when they've had guest hosts, they make reference to this. And yeah, so it's depending on how well or how badly the housekeeping goes is part of the whole show.
I'll just say real quick, and then we'll get to others, of course, but the don't underestimate how some of the little things that you do may become actually quite lovable to your listeners. I remember Adam Carolla for a while was in the Guinness Book of World Records, most downloads for a podcast. I saw him live in Boston once, live podcast, and it got time to do a live read, and he said, I don't know, should we really do a live read at a live show? And everyone in the audience cheered. They wanted to hear him do a live read because he puts so much like gusto and enthusiasm and funny little side comments into his live read. The music podcast that I do, Past Tens, after we've recapped a top 10 list of Billboard hits from yesteryear, I recap the top 10, and my podcast partner is always waiting for me to screw up so he can make fun of me, which I thought was terrible. But then I realized that actually puts a little drama into me reading. Am I going to get through the top 10 without screwing it up? So very similar to this. Johnny, podcast, you got thoughts on this?
I do. And I was going to say, do you guys know that the podcast Super Friends has its own lore?
Oh.
Really?
And David's laughing because he knows exactly what it is.
Actually, I'm not sure.
Is that every single episode you can expect that David will bring up his music podcast at some point. Did you guys know I run a music podcast where we cover the top 10 songs of yesteryear? No. So Catherine, I was actually a little bit pessimistic about this coming up. Because housekeeping is not exclusive to this podcast. I think it's something that every show does in some form or fashion. And I think it can be done poorly. One, because rather than what the normal advice that we give, which is, hey, be sure in the beginning you're going to call out a call to action. Hey, before we start, make sure you follow the show. Make sure you go to our Patreon, email us, whatever it is. They have decided to condense all of that into its own section. And if done poorly, it's going to be the thing that people skip because they know it's just people asking us to do dumb stuff.
Absolutely.
Go buy our merch. We don't care. I'm still just going to listen to the podcast and skip that part. They have done it to a point to where it's something that the audience is now looking forward to. And clearly it's working. One, because we all get to poke fun at the female host for screwing it up and laugh along with the male host. And they get to kind of play off each other. But then two, also, if I'm a new listener, it doesn't feel like I'm being asked to go do something. It's still entertaining. And then at the same time, I'm like, that was cute. I like that. I'm going to go check out their merch store because I like this. So they have found a way, and I'm sure it wasn't purposeful. It must have just been something that it started the first time they did it. They screwed it up and then just went with it, and it worked. And it's really hard to come up with something like that when it's not organic. It just happened. It worked for them, and it's led to the success of their show. So housekeeping as its own segment is very difficult to pull off. You have to make it entertaining. You have to give someone a reason to enjoy listening to that because we're asking you to do something.
This is why I've brought it to this. Yes, exactly.
You can also track that, though. If your housekeeping sucks, there's data on that. Spotify and Apple both carry it. And now I'm beginning to think about some of the podcasts I work with, and we should go look and see how their housekeeping is doing.
You mean the what is that stat called? Dedicated list? No, I can't remember.
Consumption
percentage, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what killed me in Oregon Trail, I think. Consumption.
I get that.
Catherine, do they have to remind everybody that it's a podcast because there's a Substack as well in some other places?
Well, and they actually use the podcast is delivered via Substack.
Okay.
They are one of their whole model is Substack lured them over from a membership site that shall not be named. And they were one of the people that Substack invested $50,000 in their show so that for 1 year, there was no ads. It was Substack only. They do their premium through Substack, and they also do some writing as well through Substack. So it's all through Substack. I get it normally just like any other podcast through my podcast app. But yeah, the We Are a Podcast is that's just.
So I stuck through the housekeeping part. So it is entertaining enough that I did carry through it. So good for them.
And yeah, I think that too, you get the sense that this is very much a frenemies situation amongst these two journalists. That is their dynamic. The entire thing, that is their dynamic.
I don't want to assume or accuse or suggest, but I will. That bit should be done high. It's always going to be better.
I find it interesting.
I love. Sorry, I just got to say I love that she's like, no, I don't. I told you I quit smoking weed. I just eat it now. Like what?
That was a great line. It was a great line. Jag, you I'm
go.
interested. Catherine caught my ear when she said frenemies, because I'll be the contrarian here. While I like the segment in concept, I wasn't wild about the execution, because I am a very conflict averse person, and I don't enjoy watching sitcoms or movies or TV shows when there's conflict. And again, I know I'm probably in the minority here, but it just seemed like more than friendly teasing to me, and it came off as a little abrasive.
There was something
to me.
deeper.
Yeah, maybe, but like,
Could
and then
be.
like she's joking about having brain cancer. I can't say anyone close to me has had brain cancer, but I was like, that didn't land for me. It just, again, I like the concept, but
Fair
the
enough.
execution I found to be a little grating.
I think I took the brain tumor to be almost like a slip of the tongue. Like, if she had time to think about that joke, she probably wouldn't have made it. But
that's fair.
Anyway.
I think that it's a great opportunity, though, for role definition. So that if I'm listening to the show for the first time, and it was, that I understand who the characters, or at least who the main players are on the show, who falls in what area, and what the relationship is between the two. It's just we will pass this off as housekeeping and stuff we have to do, but also there's a moment there where you can still define who's who on the show and play the role to do it. Where you really screw that up is when you leave the defined roles that you have on the show.
There's an old morning show adage that I'm sure Matt knows, that when you have a 3-person morning show, pardon my language here, but the roles are the dick, the deer, and the dork.
Yeah. Dick, dork, deer.
Yeah. So you've got the dick, who's obviously the dick, and then you've got the deer, who's the sweet one, and then you've got the dork, who's kind of the lovable one that the dick makes fun of. So the dick, the deer, and the dork that's the basic. Think of any morning show you grew up listening to.
I just did. I was like, wait a minute.
That's the formula. Yeah, dick, deer, dork.
And then people say, "Why does all radio sound the same?"
But everybody has that defined role.
I mean, I hope I'm not repeating what we've already said, but they've kind of pulled off a great trick here, and that is that I think we all struggle with the housekeeping, and I think the advice we've given on this podcast before is keep your calls of action to a minimum, because your listeners are only going to remember usually one or maybe two things. So give out the website and the Twitter handle if you want, but don't, because then, like Matt said, or Johnny, I'm sorry, I forget, but that's the part you're going to fast forward through. Like, you're not going to listen. You're not going to listen to that. So if they really truly have turned it into like destination listening, that's amazing. I'm reminded of a segment on, I don't know if anyone's a fan of the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway, the improv comics. At the very end of the show, which is something that's like a throwaway, they say, okay, Ryan, you're the winner, so therefore you have to read the credits of the show in the style of a blank. And they picked a different thing every time, like in the style of 1920s carnival barker, or in the style of an AT&T operator, whatever. And so we always kind of stuck around for that, even though all they're doing is reading the credits. So I wonder if now we should all challenge ourselves to make our housekeeping more entertaining. I mean, they pulled it off. So anything else on that?
My work is done here.
Well done.
Well done, Catherine. All right. Matt, it is time for your submission. Very good. And
this is the episode art. This is the episode art, by the way. This is an episode of the Women of Ill Repute. The Women of Ill Repute are Maureen Holloway and Wendy Mesley. They are Canadian broadcasters turned podcasters, and they interview celebrities. That's not special. Why I chose this, they don't have any segments per se, other than they do a little bit before the show to intro the guest. But this is after they say goodbye to the guest. And so often we pass along advice as podcast producers, saying, once it's over, it's over. There's really not much more to add after this. But they have enough, I think, broadcast experience that they are able to carry the show forward. So they're saying goodbye to the guest, and the show goes on for probably another 5 minutes. We will not listen to all the 5 minutes.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Really nice to meet you too. Yeah. Good luck with all the projects.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. I know what you're going to say.
She was lovely.
That voice is so iconic, right? You could identify it anywhere. And it's funny. It occurred to me, I was telling some people today, I had to rush back to do this interview, that I was like, oh, we're talking to Pamela Anderson today.
Oh, just Pamela Anderson. Oh,
yeah, just Pamela Anderson. Whether you're 12 years old or 40, male, female, gay, straight, what, everybody was like, wow. She's seriously famous, right?
I find it really interesting that she's trying to say that it was really difficult. Like, she fell in love and she had these kids and she was a sex symbol and she liked sex and she kind of got taken advantage of by people. And as her son says, she was misunderstood, but then she's so beautiful. You look at her and you go, oh, really? Oh, really? You've had a hard time? But she has been, well, she says she's not a victim. She's a survivor, but she also says, don't feel sorry for me. I've made these choices and some of it was kind of shitty.
You know, being extremely beautiful, as you and I both know.
Yes. Yeah, we're natural beauties.
Being extremely beautiful it carries a burden. Some people are like, oh, crime.
I love how Canadian this show sounds, by the way. I love the little intricacies.
And Pamela Anderson, born on Canada Day.
In Canada.
I find it a little disturbing that you know that. Johnny Podcast, you want to kick off this one?
Yeah. Question, Matt, does this have a video component?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say, do you guys...
Except that Pam wouldn't allow video. Pam wouldn't allow him.
I'm not sure that's the video you were asking about.
Does so one quick funny point off of that. So do you guys know who Sydney Sweeney is?
Yes.
The actress?
Yes.
Hosted SNL.
All the men on here will know. Yeah. So she went on a podcast with the CEO of Ford, and someone was ripping them online because there's an audio only podcast, and they said, "Who wants to consume an audio only podcast of Sydney Sweeney being interviewed?" Anyway, this is such a great segment. I guess if you were to call it a segment, this is such a great aspect to a podcast to have when you have a co-host. It's really difficult to do something like this if you are a solo host. I think it can be done well, but this just seems like it should be in every co-hosted podcast, just sort of a breakdown that the listener feels like they can join in on. So the listener feels like they're a part of the breakdown. Now the guest is gone. Now we can give our thoughts on this whole interview, because when it's just a standard one host, one guest interview, at the end, the listener is left to their own devices to think about how that interview went. Now, when you have a co-host, you are able to keep that listener around for an extra 5 minutes. Normally that listener's gone right after the interview's over, but now we're keeping you for an extra 5 minutes. We're digging our hooks, for lack of a better term, into the listener a little bit deeper to get them more invested in the podcast, because now we can get the host's real thoughts on how that interview went in real time right afterwards. And it was enjoyable. I liked it. I think it's something that I think it's a great example of something that multiple host podcasts should be doing more of.
I think,
but only if it's done well, like this.
It has to be done well.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, you put your finger on it. Like, it's almost like a little trick. It's an illusion of listening in on somebody's conversation about something they just did. Like, you feel like you're not supposed to be hearing this. This is what they say. She's hung up. She can't hear what they're saying now. Now, of course, she can if she tunes into the podcast. So it's a little bit of an illusion, but man, it works. And you want to hear. I think Howard Stern used to do this. A guest would leave, and then they would have a 10-minute recap, and you always stuck around for that because you want to hear what they say after they leave, right? Matt, you want to go?
Yeah, it's that after show thing, which, Elvis Duran will do that at, in New York. They'll put in a podcast form where the show just keeps going. Howard Stern, we never really knew when it ended and when it should end. It just kept on going. And, I had Matty Stott on my podcast this week, and he's just talking about if you have a radio show, do an after show where you talk about all the things that happened on your show. I never really realized it till just now when we isolated this. All the things that they were saying, that's the promo for the show, because I could, as I'm listening to this, going, I got to go hear the rest of the show. Yeah. So that end part about repurposing it, I mean, does it really matter if first of all, these two have a very high completion rate, 89, 90, up to 95% per episode. But, does it really matter if you have, a co-hosted show and maybe it's not very good afterwards? Does it matter? I don't think it really matters. At least that you're putting people together to give it a try.
Someone's going to stick around. Someone who's listening to that show is going to go, man, I really loved that they kept going after that was over. I needed a little bit more. It doesn't have to be everybody, but someone is going to, and that's who you're making the show for, is that person.
I marvel at at Wendy and Maureen and their ability to just, have a show whenever and carry on. They could go for, they only went for 5 minutes, but that's a little bit longer than they normally do at the end of the show, just to talk and wrap it up. I should point out, they do 35 minutes. They were only allowed 15 with Pam Anderson. And it was part of the promo or the junket tour for the, I guess, the
documentary
Netflix.
on her or something?
Yeah, the documentary.
I think it was a perfect storm because everybody, like they said, knows who Pam Anderson is. Everybody, I'm sure, has an opinion on Pam Anderson, right, wrong, or indifferent. And the fact that they went a little bit deep with her, if you listen to the entire interview, and really got to know her as a person, some of the things she struggled with and the different ways she sort of reinvented herself over the years and how she looks back on her younger days now with the benefit of time and being a little bit older and wiser. It was an interesting discussion. And two hosts, obviously, that did very well. I didn't like the mic sound on one of them. I wasn't sure if she was on a great mic, but I thought they were very talented at what they do.
Echo. There's echo.
A little bit there. Yeah.
She wasn't using a Blue Yeti, was she, Matt?
No.
Okay,
We got rid of it. We threw those in the garbage.
Good.
Yeah.
Jag, are you like the bionic woman? Do you have a bionic ear that can hear?
I have radio friends that have 10 times the ear that I do.
Yeah. Catherine? You're going to say something?
I really liked, I like we've all been saying, I really enjoyed the sort of the fly on the wall aspect of this. And you get already a sense of the two hosts. You get a little bit of a window into what they're like. One suggestion I had was I would have loved to hear a little bit of what we thought it was going to be like and what it really was like. Now, the reason for that is because that sets up a little bit of a compare and contrast, which can be helpful and interesting. And the only other thing I thought was that it's kind of like on the fly reactions. So they haven't had time to maybe process this a little bit. And you said the segment went on a little bit longer. So maybe they had that 5 minutes on, even 5 minutes on, having a little bit of a deeper perspective on what it was like getting to talk to Pam Anderson.
Also, the opportunity to give a little inside baseball too of 15 minutes with Pam Anderson. That's all we were allowed, guys. I'm sorry. We would have kept her for 2 hours, but
they did mention in the longer part that they were not allowed to do video and they could only do audio. So similar to your point, Johnny.
Oh, I forgot about that. I turned it into an audiogram, but generally this show is video.
Well, except for when you have Pam Anderson on, they're like, "Sorry, guys, no video."
Pam Anderson, Sydney Sweeney,
Yeah, even that. I mean, Pam Anderson has been famously, as of late, has been going on red carpets and things with no makeup on. So for somebody who has such a visual appeal, she's really challenging some of those expectations. And the no video, to me, falls right into that. So even just hearing a little commentary on that would have been interesting as well.
I'm wearing no makeup on the live stream today. I think it's brave. I do. Yeah.
Stunning and brave.
I mean, I actually like the inside baseball stuff. You can go too far with it, but anytime you clue the listener into the fact that, even if you tell them, listener, we pre-recorded that bit you just heard. That's probably pretty obvious because blah, 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 because, my podcast partner was sick the other day or whatever. Little bits of that. It gets back to anytime you can share personal stuff. I think it's great. Matt, totally random technical question, but the episode art was YouTube thumbnail size instead of square. Is that the way things are going now? Because I can never keep up.
No, that was just for the audiogram that I made so that we could have some YouTube presence.
Mm-hmm. Happy birthday, John.
Yes.
Happy birthday. John. Happy birthday, John. Now it's a radio show.
John Ross checking in. He's
I'm
30,
the deer.
He's only 35. Wow, youngin. All right, we'll move on to the final one. And Matt, it's the Didi and Littell. Thank you very much. The Didi and Littell show. So I'll do the preface for this one since it's the show that I submitted. This is a podcast that I produce. Didi and Littell are this very charming and incredibly smart married couple who also both happen to be in the cybersecurity industry, working at different companies. But they like to talk about issues around cybersecurity, but also they go off on whatever moves them, whatever topic moves them that day that they're recording. I suggested to them that we should come up with some regular segment for a guest and we started with just the simple, I don't know, 3 questions, whatever. And so we wanted something a little bit cybersecurity themed, at least. So I think I'm just going to play the clip, and I think it kind of speaks for itself. This is something they will do with the guest towards the end of the show.
And now Lital and Didi present Prove You're Not a Robot. 3 final authenticating questions for our guest.
So, Reed, if you were a cybersecurity superhero, what would be your name? Who would play you in the Hollywood movie to follow?
My name would be nobots.txt, as a kind of a play on words of robots.txt. And I've been told, so I get a couple doppelgangers. I get Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, and I get Edward Norton occasionally. I prefer the Edward Norton one, so I'm going to say Edward Norton.
He's my favorite actor in the world.
So we've been talking about future of passwords, and you've given us a hint about that, but do kind of give us your thoughts about the future of passwords.
I have 100% confidence that like 99% plus of our password use will be gone by the end of the decade. I do think passkeys are kind of like the biggest breakthrough, and the same way that we log into our devices with Touch ID and Face ID can become ubiquitous, and it will be a win both for businesses on the security side and conversion side.
And last question, everybody talks about AI. Give us one thought of something that's really bad about AI and something that's really, really good about AI.
If you look at the scoring of GPT-3 versus GPT-4, like example, like MCAT, LSAT, all these things that used to be good barometers of intelligence, debatably so, of course, you would see that GPT-3 would not have gotten into law school versus GPT-4 is now going to UCLA law. But the reason it's scary, if you can commoditize above average intelligence, is not only do the good guys have that, obviously the fraudsters have that. And as part of the presentation I'm doing, I just show how I built a phishing website that was mimicking Bank of America in about 5 minutes.
All right. So as you can tell, the aim was to try to get a little personal and fun with the guest, but also to kind of stick to some of the topics that the guest was expert in. So you can be cruel if you want. I know I produced it, but I'd love to hear your feedback on that Prove You're Not a Robot segment.
I love the
Jag,
I love the concept of it. I think it fits with the theme of the show. I'm not sure if they got to 3 actual questions because
he didn't. Yeah, I got to work with him on better identifying each. He never said this is the second question. But
it jumped out. I thought it came across.
Okay, fair enough. It was an interesting topic. The idea that passwords are going away, and biometrics and passkeys and all that, which I don't understand. So it was kind of good to get a little bit of explainer on there. Dave, you said to be cruel. I did make a note. I'm not going to be cruel, but
that's all right, go ahead.
The graphic or the artwork for the show says Didi and Lital, the podcast. And if you find it in Apple or Spotify, it's the Didi and Lital show. So you may want to just adjust the branding there, because I don't think you need to say podcast and podcast artwork anywhere. I'll defer to industry expert Matt on that. But I thought it was a really good segment and a good idea for a segment and consistent with the branding of the show.
Question, thanks. David, do the guests get the questions in advance?
No, only sort of haphazardly. In the moments before we start recording, and I guess we've kind of gone back and forth on that. Eventually we started revealing to them the superhero question, because if you were a cybersecurity superhero, who would you be? Like, it's a fun question, but if you're not prepared for it, it might take you a minute to come up with something good. So I think
that's why we edit.
That's how we edit
too.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Well, I was going to say, I can tell this is edited, and that's the information you just gave was helpful. I actually think this whole segment could be fluffier. It's, it's edited, but a little bit of the wrestling with the question kind of could be fun, especially because it seems like everybody's having a good time with these questions. So I think that some of the fluff could come back in and be really valuable for this segment.
Yeah.
But I thought it was great.
Thank you. I mean, the clip I played is a condensed version, so I took a few liberties editing for the purposes of this podcast. But I take your point.
Gotcha.
So thank you. Yeah. Johnny?
A great podcast humanizes their guest. And in a topic, something like cybersecurity, like we think it's so like there's a type of person that has to work in cybersecurity and IT and like and data engineering. Like they're very the stereotype you think of is he's just like very robotic people. Like I think of Rami Malek in Mr. Robot. Like there's just this
Yes.
very like stoic, almost no personality. And when you're talking about a topic like this, it can all just be really dry and grainy and not feel like there's any personality to it. And to have something like this, do you play this at the beginning or the end?
At the end.
At the end. I almost wonder if it's good to have it in the beginning, just as sort of like a warm-up exercise, just so we can be like, okay, this is kind of how we feel about this person too. Because like, I love the superhero question. That is such a great question that I think a lot of podcasts should do and a lot of content should do, just because, I mean, everyone can relate to that question. Everyone's like, oh, if there was a movie made about my life, who would I want to play me? Like, that's such a fun question to have. And I agree with Catherine in leaving in the fluff because like, yeah, it was edited for this, podcast, for this showing, obviously now. But yeah, like I would think it would be fun to listen to him wrestle with coming up with Edward Norton, because as you're listening to that, you're also thinking yourself, like, David, like, who would I want to play me?
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder who he's going to think of too. And then if you were to play that at the beginning, now I think this guy looks like Edward Norton the whole time.
Norton.
I'm thinking Edward Norton's
And you
doing
get
this
a picture in your
podcast
head.
too. Yeah,
That's a good point. And I think most of the podcasts I do, if I do a special segment like this, I do save it to the end. But I think you bring up a great point. The beginning, or maybe have something quick at the beginning, at least that's a little bit different, because I worry sometimes, because in a long form interview, if the first question is, oh, so tell me, where'd you grow up? And it kind of has a slow kind of burn opening, I worry you could lose people. So anyway, good thoughts.
And those second two questions change every episode?
That's correct. Yeah, we sometimes cater them towards the guest.
Well, what's good about it, especially with these two specifically, is that I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it seems like the questions are broad enough that it can apply to everybody. Like as someone who's not in cybersecurity, like I hadn't thought about passwords and how that might change, but every one of us here has 25 different passwords for 25 different things. If those go away, how do you feel about it? Like that's something that all of us can relate to. And I think if they seem like they were really intentional about crafting those two questions specifically. Everyone thinks about that and AI.
What I do is I tend to put up on a monitor where my host can see it, like maybe like 8 questions, and let him cherry pick from them. So the host gets to pick the question. But
nice.
I remember another one was like, tell us about your first computer. So that's sort of on point, but also we all remember our first computer, right? So it's kind of a cool question. Matt, you got something?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of floating the questions over to the guest. Somebody suggested that on the internet earlier this week, and I said, absolutely not. You're just going to get a bunch of rehearsed answers, and your show is going to be really, really dull. However, just telling your guest, be ready for this segment because we're going to be asking you this, is really a great way for them to warm up. You know it's coming. You don't know, they're going to rehearse it. It's really going to be the only part, but they're going to be warm and ready for it. I also think the name of it, and Jag pointed this out. What's the name of the segment again, Jag? But
this is like authentication or something, Dave.
It's Prove You're Not a Robot. 3 final authenticating questions.
Yeah. Right. It's just on brand. I know exactly what the show is. It matches to what I'm listening to. I really like this, but I totally understand where are we going to put this in the show? Because if it's good, it's kind of wasted at the end.
Counterpoint, finally, my loving counterpoint.
Finally,
more podcast
lore. More Super Friends.
Catherine's loving counterpoint is our own segment.
Welcome to Catherine's loving counterpoint.
I'm going to have a counter to this counterpoint.
Okay, having something that people are regular listeners are anticipating that is taking them to the end, that also is incredibly valuable. So don't discount that.
Okay, so even more loving counterpoint is that if I know it's at the end and I don't like what I'm listening to now, I'm going to fast forward to the end.
True, but at least you get to the
end. At least you get to the end.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one? We are pretty much at time here. And so thank you, viewers and listeners who tuned in and chimed in. And I'm not good at the housekeeping part. So, Matt,
take a lesson from Katie and Jesse, man.
Let me do the housekeeping.
Johnny's going to do the housekeeping. Johnny Podcast.
If you enjoy this type of content, please reach out to us on social media. If you would like your show or segment to be featured on our podcast, to be either ripped to shreds, praised to the heavens, or just, it was fine. Feel free to reach out to us on social media. We are all over the place. And if you want to contact us on social media, we're going to drop all of our handles for you now, starting with David.
All right. It's David Yaz of Boston, pod617.com, Boston Podcast Network. Catherine.
And before I give you my handle, I just want to make it clear, I'm a listener of Blocked and Reported, in case that did not come across. I have nothing to do with that show other than being a listener. Hello, Catherine O. That is where I am on Instagram and Twitter.
Matt.
I am at Matt Kundle on Twitter and X and Instagram and most things social.
Jag.
John Gay, Jag In Detroit Podcasts, Jag In Detroit on Twitface and all the social media platforms.
And back to the star of housekeeping, Johnny Podcast.
Let me put my broom away really quick. At Johnny Podcast on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you all. See you next time on the Super Friends. Be good.
Thanks for listening to the Podcast Super Friends. For a transcript of the show or to connect with the Super Friends, go to the show notes of this episode or go to soundoff.network.